Hey artists! Welcome to another tutorial. Today I'm going to be showing you how I painted this portrait of a horse. Now, the full-length masterclass of this horse portrait was added to the Wildlife Painting Academy for the month of September, complete with my voice walking you through every moment, including a palette cam so that you can actually see exactly how I mix my paint throughout this entire painting. You can check it out in the link in the description. Now, let's begin. As usual, I'm painting with oils, but you can get the same effect with acrylics, though I highly recommend working with a slow drying medium. I worked exclusively with acrylics for years, and the slow drying medium was a total game changer. So I'm starting off here by mapping out the darkest parts of my painting with a large brush. I love filbert brushes. They are just my favorite shape because they're so versatile. And yeah, so I'm just basically going in with my darkest paint, using ivory black here, and mapping out where the darkest parts of the painting are gonna go. So because I'm going for some really strong dramatic lighting here in this portrait, I wanted to go with a really dark background, and that's going to make everything pop. You're gonna have that dark background that's right next to some really bright areas, and it's just gonna create a really dynamic painting, and it's really gonna make that horse pop. I love using brush strokes and texture in my art, so I'm going with a sort of rough background here, nice and dark, but with a pop of that beautiful purple, just to give it a bit of fun. And that way, at least, the horse is in some sort of environment. We've got that darkness that's really gonna make it pop, but it's not going to distract away from the horse. So now that I've got everything sort of blocked in here, I'm gonna start to go in and actually paint my underpainting of my horse here. So I'm gonna start with my darkest tones. Here we've got a nice dark gray, and again, I'm using a really large brush, and I'm gonna start to lay in those darkest tones. I always like to move from darkest to lightest, so now that I've got all those deepest shadows laid down, I'm going to start to add some more white to my paint in order to make it brighter and lighter, and I'm going to kind of work through that gradient, starting to flesh out the actual 3D structure of our horse. And now it's time to move into our even brighter portions of the face. So I've added more white to my paint here. Still have a medium-ish tone gray. I'm gonna keep my underpainting darker than I want the final image to be, and that's gonna allow me to build up that fur texture a lot more easily. So even though I really like working with really big brushes for my underpainting, there's some areas that are just a little hard to get with a huge brush. So here I'm just grabbing a cheap round brush, and I'm just kind of adding a little bit more structure to that finicky little eye area. So for the mane, I'm starting out by basically defining where those clumps of hair are gonna go. So hair and fur does tend to stick together, which is gonna create those sort of clumps. So I'm going in with a dark brown and basically defining where those hair clumps are gonna be. And then I'm gonna go in and using a brighter color, kind of lay in that base layer. So now I'm going in with a brighter tone, still using a really big brush here, and blocking in the rest of that mane. So my underpainting here is almost finished. The last thing I want to do before I let it dry for a few days is go in with a dry blending brush. This is going to kind of take the edge off all of those rough brush strokes. And what's nice is that it's actually going to help us to build up a preliminary fur texture, which is going to make our lives so much easier. So I put my painting aside for a few days, let those oils dry completely, and now I'm jumping into the next layer. I wanted to really amp up that background a little bit, make it even darker, so I'm just starting off by applying another layer of dark paint here just to make it a little more concentrated and dramatic. So now it's time to start actually building up some of that fur detail. Now, horses have teeny tiny little hairs that make up their coat. They have very short fur. So it's really important that we know this and pay attention to this, because if we paint really long hair on a horse, it's gonna look really bizarre. So that's why I'm making tiny little brush strokes, letting my filbert brush kind of do the work for me, using a really light hand, letting the tips of those bristles sort of kiss the canvas and build up a little bit of that fur texture. So I'm making sure that I keep a close eye on my reference photo because the direction that the hair flows in is really, really important. And we can't be expected to remember the direction all the time just from memory. So don't be afraid to use a reference photo. It is one of the best tools that we have. So now that I've got that first layer of detail throughout my painting here, I'm going to move to a lighter tone and use that to start to build up even more realistic fur texture. So you could see those tiny little brush strokes that I'm making, letting the bristles just kiss the surface there, making little tiny lines that are gonna basically be the individual hairs that are making up this coat. So our fur here on our horse is really starting to come together. I'm going in now with some lighter paint in order to really make it pop. So I'm hitting those high points where most of the highlights are going to be and adding that little bit of brightness that's really going to make our fur come together. So now it's time to make our mane come together here. The fur looks great so far, but our mane doesn't really look like anything yet. So I'm starting off by again sort of defining where the shadows on those hair clumps are gonna be, kind of going with a little bit of a golden tone. And you can see I'm making those nice long brush strokes, giving a little wiggle here and there to show that there is some nice movement in that mane. And now I'm going in with a lighter paint here. I've added more white to it, and I'm gonna start to actually build out that hair. And it's kind of following the same pattern that I did before, giving a little bit of wiggle there with my brush to show that there's some nice wave happening in these individual hairs. So now I'm going in with a small brush and adding some of those individual hair details that are really going to bring this mane into the light and make it look nice and realistic. So all of my details are done. I put my painting aside for a few days so it was completely dry, and now I am glazing. I really wanted to play with these shadows a little bit, add a bit of a purple tone to the shadows to give them a bit more life and color, but I also want to just be able to dial in those shadows so this painting looks a lot more dynamic. We've got a really dramatic light source, which gives us a lot of opportunity to play with that 3D structure. So here is where I'm kind of dialing things in a little bit with my glazes. Now here I'm using my favorite glazing medium of all time, Liquid Original by Winsor & Newton. I use it in every single one of my paintings. I love it that much. So if you want to start glazing your oil paintings, which I highly recommend you do, I always recommend getting that glazing medium. There is a link to where you can actually buy it in the description of this video. So now we are almost done. I've got my glaze looking all good, and now I'm going in and placing in a few final details that are really gonna make this portrait pop. And we're done! Thank you so much for watching this tutorial on how to paint a horse portrait. If you want to improve your animal art, then you're definitely going to want to check out my free guide, 5 tips for improving your animal art. You can grab the free guide in the description of this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Now, if you're craving more help and want the full real-time tutorial complete with my voice walking you through every single moment, paint mixing recipes, reference photos, and more, I think you will love the Wildlife Painting Academy. New tutorials are added each month, and it truly is your secret weapon for learning how to paint realistic wildlife easily. You can check it out in the description of this video.